The most recent studies indicate little or few long-term genetic effects for radiation. One recent study indicated that only one child out of 12,000 children of radiation-exposed Japanese had a mutation. However, several years ago, we developed a test that we thought would pick up a majority of mutations. The test uses just an ounce of blood and involves the purification of the oxygen-carrying protein of red cells. Many of the radiation-exposed people had an abnormal value in this test. These data indicate that the mutation rate for radiation may be much higher than we previously thought, perhaps as much as 1,000 times higher.
If Dr. Hirsch's findings are correct, it would mean that seemingly healthy children could be carrying genetic damage that might not reveal itself for generations.
We're not sure, though, how many of the mutations measured by this test will have bad effects in future generations.
A single bomb devastated a city and left its survivors with lifelong suffering. How deep are the scars of Hiroshima?
Nuclear weapons are radically different from ordinary bombs. If you compare, for instance, the destruction of Tokyo to that of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, well, Tokyo was completely destroyed. More people were killed in Tokyo than were killed in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. But it took thousands of bombs, over hours of saturation bombing, to do that to Tokyo. In Hiroshima, a single bomb dropped from a single plane destroyed an entire city. Now that created in survivors in Hiroshima the sense of a sudden and absolute shift from normal existence to an overwhelming encounter with death. They suddenly found themselves in the midst of a sea of dead and dying, and they walked about in a daze, like people in a dream, as they described it, not really knowing whether they were dead or alive. Now, one imagines that in the midst of disaster, people are panic-stricken, running around, screaming. That's not the way it was in Hiroshima. Rather, they walked around quietly, as in a silent movie, very muted, very still. And when you see the films of those early days, that's the kind of faces that you see. That's also psychic numbing. Their minds are shut down, they're muted. It's a defense against ordinary or normal degrees of feeling, because one simply couldn't permit oneself ordinary forms of feeling and suffering, ordinary psychological pain, to those influences and still remain sane.
The psychological pain suffered in Hiroshima still exists today.
I guess it was about 10 years ago when I had a fire in the house. There was a time when, at that time, I couldn't separate Hiroshima and present. And that was, as weird as it sounds, it was very true. I became very hysterical, which I wasn't hysterical during the Hiroshima fire. I could not separate Hiroshima and present. I had to stay off of work for about a month. And the doctors did not know what to do with me. I didn't realize that it was a common, would you call it neurosis or whatever it was that happened. We're finding about more of those things now.
Hundreds of Hiroshima survivors now live in the United States, in areas like Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. Most do not want to be identified. They feel a sense of shame and embarrassment in being a survivor. It has been through the efforts of people like Paul Tsunishi of the Japanese American League that the plight of the Hiroshima survivor is now emerging into the open. Various Japanese groups have organized radiation seminars held in major American cities.
We are bringing a program, a public forum to you today.
At this one, held recently in Los Angeles, the public learns that the effects of Hiroshima are still being felt, more than 35 years after the bomb.
I am a victim and a survivor of the atomic bomb.
The specific problems are medical insurance, their inability to get insurance, or if they have insurance, they don't want the carriers to know it. And they're not sure what will happen if it becomes known that they are survivors of radiation from before. Additionally, there's a question of getting and maintaining jobs because they might be ostracized because of that. And there's a social stigma of being ostracized from the larger group.
For Kaz Sawishi, the seminar reawakens tragic memories. The photographed images of a devastated Hiroshima will never be forgotten by those who see them. Of seconds, a city was destroyed, yet its legacy may last forever.